specific issues such as cleanup activities and environmental restoration, waste and nuclear materials management and disposition, excess facilities, future land use and long-term stewardship, risk management, and communications and outreach. I appreciate your attendance today, and I look forward to the Hanford Advisory Board's development and submission of constructive, actual policy level advice on the Hanford cleanup. Thank you and welcome.
So a handful of announcements on how to do this. We've not had hybrid committee meetings before post-COVID. Ecology has graciously offered us both the room and the technology at no cost to the board, which is very cool. You see these owl thingies, these column thingies, they're called owls. They handle both the audio and the visual, so people outside the room see who's talking and see who's in the room. They're also picking up sound. So if you have a laptop with you, please make sure the sound is off of your laptop and your microphone in Teams is muted. Because if those things are active, the owls will screech. Also, we are recording this meeting, and the recordings from HAB committee meetings get posted online. So you need to know we are also recording the meeting. We've got 21 people online, minus the 6 or 7 computers in the room. So, somewhere between 15 and 17 people who are here with us, just not in the room with us. So if you are online with us, would you please sign in chat with your name and affiliation? Because we do like keeping track of who is here. If you are in the room, we have a special treat for you. If you sign in over here, which you need to do, remove the apples.
They're in there.
Oh, okay. There is a sign-in sheet. We really do want you to sign in, and you really can have apples and cookies if you're in the room. Okay, Ryan, what did I forget?
For folks in the office, our exits are right there, and the door you came in, obviously. If you use the restroom today, it's just at the end of the hallway to the left before the double doors. There's also a water fountain out there. We'll have a break later today, so if anybody wants to go to the vending machines in the back to get a drink or a snack, let me know and I can escort you back there. But just echo what Ruth said about your computers, is if you sign on the computer in the room, make sure it's muted and the volume's turned off, because like she said, the owls will get angry. And then on the side too, if you have allowed them sidebar conversation, the owl might pick it up, so just be mindful of that if you're gonna have a side conversation during the meeting. Just know that they can pick it up and they can hear it online. That being said, that's all I have to do.
That's right. The owls will look at you when you talk too. So not only do they pick up what you're saying, they will move towards whoever is talking.
I'm getting a cookie. Okay, I'm sorry.
As long as you sign in. Questions about logistics and technology, and we do have tech support here at Ecology, so that's very cool. Rob, do you want to go over the agenda, or do you want me to?
Well, I can talk about it. First, I'd like to say is I'm the temporary or interim leader of this committee right now. I've tried to make some phone calls to folks and to find out who still wants to be involved in some of our issues and this committee. So, and I'll make this clear a little bit later again in the meeting. We've been decimated with retirements. There's a lot of things to talk about, and the agenda, everybody can see the agenda in front of us. We're going to have some presentations to begin with, and then later on in the meeting, towards the very end, I'd like to talk a little bit about the work that we want to do and any issues that people might have, and have a kind of a free-flowing set of conversations. So go ahead and introduce the first presenter.
Let's do one other thing. We've got the minutes, wrong computer. Sorry, I'm getting used to the technology. Okay, meeting minutes from your last meeting in April. We will fix the footer. Apparently, we got confused as to what month it was, and I should have caught that. This really is the April meeting, and the footer will say April. Are there any comments, corrections, clarifications that need to be made? Okay, are you all right with us finalizing and posting them on the website?
Yeah, I'm fine. I went through.
So, Josh, we just need to look at the footer. That's on this.
Ruth, I have a question.
Yeah.
So we're accustomed to being on computers. I'm very sorry, I'll turn that off. And so since we don't have chat, how, do we raise our hands here
Yeah.
in the room?
So
Okay.
for PIC, given that we've only done this one other time, people would raise their hands in the room and I'd look at the queue and we sort of made it work. And we're learning how to do it smoothly. I can't say it's smooth yet. So computers are totally optional if you're in the room. It does give you access to chat, but not everybody wants to be wired in, so it's another part of hybrid. And if you see somebody and you notice that I missed them, it's okay to say, hey, Ruth, Mia wants to say something. Okay?
Ruth,
Yes,
is there a password to get on the Wi-Fi?
yes. There are sheets and there are cards scattered around the table. The password is a really good one because it's not easy to remember. So if you need instructions, we have them. Any other questions? Like I said, we do have tech support if you get stuck and you need it. Brian he's got them on speed dial. Before we go into the next piece, Gary, would you please make a pitch for orientation and tour so people know the deadline is really the deadline?
Yes. Hello, everybody. How you doing? For those of you who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Gary Younger. I'm the federal coordinator. And we're excited about October 18th because that is going to be the first orientation with a windshield tour that we have had in years. So we're excited about that. Welcoming new members, current members are welcome to join as well, so that we can welcome in the new members. We are also going to be taking a windshield tour out on site. There is a couple of caveats on that you should be aware of, is that if you want to go on that trip, you must send me your name as it appears on your driver's license. That way I can get it to security and they can get you badged and we're good to go. No badge, no trip. And I want everybody to go on the trip. Second is there is a dress code for the trip. Very simple. Pants, sturdy shoes, typically a hiking boot type of shoe. You must have sleeves that are at least 4 inches, so most short sleeve jackets will probably work there. And be prepared to have fun. We're going to be taking a photo of the group at Hammer, which will be one of our stops, but we won't be getting off the bus out on site. So it's going to be a quick, it'll be about a 4-hour tour. We will jump on the bus out front here, go over to one of our DOE buildings, get the badges. We'll have lunch there, and that's a BYOB, bring your own bag for lunch, because there are very limited options over there and we have very limited time. So running down to Wendy's or something like that, you're probably going to miss the bus. So be prepared to provide for yourself there. And we don't want anybody to miss the bus. And then jump on the bus, go on our tour, and then everybody will be dropped off back here at ecology. So we've got a full day. For those of you who haven't been out on site or out on site in a while, there's a lot of neat stuff to look at out there. Yeah, we've done a lot of work, and we're proud to show it off. You know, we've been talking to each other via Teams for the past couple of years. We're now able to see each other in 3D, which is awesome. And now we're able to get folks out on site, and the department is excited about that. So please, the main takeaways are, please send me your name as it appears on your driver's license to my email, gary.younger@rl.doe.gov, or send it to Ruth or Josh. They'll give it to me. Appropriate footwear, pants, and 4-inch sleeves, and sack lunch. That's it. Any question? Did I get everything right? Mike, did I get everything?
No further, thank you.
Any questions on that?
The agenda and calendar invite email will go out to the orientation today. So there will be additional information today, and then it'll be reminders again in the Thursday update. So you're gonna see a number of reminders about that, but the hard deadline Friday, if you want to go on the tour, is serious. It's really painful to look somebody in the eye and say, you can't take the tour because you didn't get your information.
Yes, and thank you for reminding me. I must have those names by Friday.
So a question here, about the new members coming on. They're fully informed.
They have, so Sue has called everybody.
All but two.
All but two. They've been on the email distribution for full board information, including Thursday updates, for at least a week, if not 2 weeks. So assuming they are not in email shell shock, yes.
And I confirmed that they have been receiving emails.
And we did.
I can't confirm they've read them all, but they've received.
And we did send them a save the date.
Yeah, and that's what we were mentioning, is that we sent the new members specifically a save the date for the 18th.
So the good news is, yes, communication has gone out. The bad news is that, as you all know, when you join HABland, you get lots of email. Other questions?
Just how many positions were filled and how many remain to fill?
Oh, I'm bumping that to Gary.
Don't have my sheet in front of me, but we're going to be having 15 new members. 16 new members. Thank you. And we will wind up with a board, I think, of about 34. So I'm not going to do public math for you, but we will have almost a full slate, plus a lot of new alternates.
Right. So that's 34 seats at the table. The public at large seats do not have alternates, but the others do. So the number of the community is not just 32, it's about double that roughly.
Gary, just a reminder, you mentioned alternates for orientation. So.
Yes, normally our rule is that only one person per stakeholder group is reimbursed on travel and authorized. However, because this is so important, the department is relaxing that. So both primary and alternate may attend. Welcome to come. And we're looking forward to meeting everybody. Thank you, Tom.
We've got presenters here. So let me suggest that we move on to tank integrity because we promised them 1:15 and we're a smidge behind.
Let me get at the table.
Mike or Gary, do you want to introduce our folks?
Well, we've got Eric Nelson and brain cramp, Jason Gunter. That's correct. From WRPS. They're going to be talking to us about the tank integrity program that we have. It's a very robust program. I've heard the briefing several times before, and I learned something every time. And if y'all will come and join us at the table.
Stand up front, maybe?
You can stand up in front too.
You can do that as well.
An owl will follow you as you dance or talk or whichever you would like. For those in the room, there are copies of the presentation. If you are online with us, the presentation will also be posted under the HAB part of Hanford.gov. So there are multiple ways to see the slides now and see them later. Just boss me around if you want to change the slide.
Okay, will do. Well, thank you everyone for having us. So my name's Eric Nelson. I'm with the Office of River Protection Tank Farm Project, the program. With me is Jason Gunter. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, the fan here is going quite loudly, so if you could speak up.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I can speak up a little louder. So for those that didn't hear, my name's Eric Nelson. Oh,
Sorry about that.
Okay, back to normal.
Maybe not so fast.
Ryan, technical question.
I don't see the owl move.
It doesn't move.
It's got a
It's
camera.
just the camera inside's a full 360 camera. It's
Yeah,
just
thanks,
watching the
guys.
whole audience.
It's
Yeah.
moving.
More than tanks. Awesome.
Yeah.
No problem, no problem.
All right, give it another redo.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
1, 2, go.
hi everyone. So my name's Eric Nelson. I'm with the Office of River Protection Tank Farms Program. With me is Jason Gunter. Jason Gunter is the Washington River Protection Solutions Tank and Pipeline Integrity Program Manager. This is just going to be a general overview of our tank integrity and monitoring program. This has been a program that's really been in existence ever since the construction of our tanks. It's been evolving and adapting over time as well. Incorporating new technologies, input from experts in the field. This led overall to a really robust program that we're excited to share with you in more details here. So go to the next slide. So in general, this is just an informational briefing, not looking for any advice or opinions, but we will be, taking questions as well. Next slide. And we wanted to kick it off at least with a general overview of the tank farms. There's a lot going on in them, so I think it's worthwhile at least just setting the stage a little bit as to how we manage them. The tank farms are located in what we call the 200 West area of the Hanford site. So that's around the central plateau. They're divvied up into two separate areas, one being 200 East and 200 West. And just for a little bit of scale as to how big that area is, it's about 7 miles from 200 East to 200 West. So they're pretty far separated. The types of tanks we have, we classify them into two separate types, our single shell tanks and our double shell tanks. There's 149 single shell tanks underground, same with our 28 double shell tanks also underground. So that brings it to a total of 177 large waste storage tanks that we manage. A little bit of background on the differences between the two different types of tanks. Single shell tanks are pretty self-explanatory. It's a single tank located underground with a carbon steel liner. Our double shell tanks are a tank within a tank. So to conceptualize that, it may be like stacking a cup on top of another. So what you get there is you have one carbon steel liner that then sits on a concrete pad with some air channels to cool that primary tank, and then you have a secondary tank that first tank is encompassed within. Nominally, our double shell tanks are about 1 to 1.25 million gallons in capacity. Per scale, that's about 30 feet tall, maybe looking at about a quarter of a football field in diameter, so fairly large. Single shell tanks, we tend to see a little more variation in capacity, all the way from 55,000 gallons up to 1 million. Tanks, I think you can see up there, a little description of when they were built. We did start with the SSTs, but as technology advanced, we did then mature to the SSTs starting in the mid-60s. Generally, with our SSTs, the vast majority of them you can see on this graphic here. A lot of them located in our west area, up to sort of the northeastern side of the presentation right there. A lot of our DSTs are located in this east area, So lime green boxes would be our DSTs. The more evergreen looking ones are our SST farms. Generally, the types of waste that these tanks tend to store, it's comprised of mostly either liquid, what we call salt cake, which is kind of just like a crusty salt type of waste, or sludge, which is kind of like peanut butter in texture. So I know that was a lot of information up front. I do want to open it before we go into more of the programmatic elements, see if there's any questions or anything I can clarify so far. Yes?
Do you have hard heel in those tanks also?
Some tanks I believe have hard heels, that right, Jason?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Can you give us an idea of what that flag, the consistency is, or do you know?
I think, Jason, do you want to take?
Sure, yeah. Hard heel in some of our tanks, largely probably our SSTs more likely that we retrieve. It's dry waste, limited liquid presence, difficult to retrieve, so it often requires more aggressive methods than otherwise. So in terms of its chemical composition, I
Like
can't
dry
go into that right
pitch?
now. Just dry, generally speaking, dry solids. Yeah.
Compared to a dried pitch or something like that?
Correct. It's not like a peanut butter texture at
Right.
that point. It's a hardened solid structure, crystalline structure that would be at that point.
Crystalline structure. Thank you.
Any other questions about that? Are other folks in the room?
Any other questions about the tank so far? It's a little bit of a crash course, but
If you are online and have questions, type them into the chat and we can either have you ask them yourself or I'd be happy to read them for you, whichever you prefer. We've got like 30 people online, so
oh wow.
we'll bounce back and forth.
Yeah.
Is there an estimate on the amount of interstitial liquid you've got in those tanks?
Yeah, so Jason.
Yeah, there is. It's documented periodically in our waste tank summary report. We update it as new information becomes available. So we conduct monitoring of our tanks, whether it's
Okay.
LOW measurements in our tanks, which we'll go into a little bit of how we monitor the SSTs and how we monitor those contents.
Yeah. And I don't have the number offhand, but we can certainly get that too as well.
Right, it certainly is documented and
Yeah.
released periodically though.
So let's keep going. We will also check in with the regulators before we open up to broader questions to sort of balance the discussion.
Okay, so I think next slide then.
All
I'm
right,
gonna pass it off to Jason here.
I'll take over, get in here a little bit to the integrity programs we have at the site for SSTs and DSTs and how we manage those type of things we look for and data we gather as part of those programs. So for the single shell tanks, those programs are intended, of course, to keep the waste in those tanks in a safe condition while we complete retrievals of those SSTs and transfer that waste over to our double shell tank system. To do that, we have various different aspects of the integrity programs for SSTs. That includes modern structural analysis that are done on a period, or have been done and are done on an as-needed basis when conditions may arise or change. We conduct integrity assessments on those assets also on a periodic basis to determine their structural integrity is still sound for continued use. And we also have various monitoring activities. So that includes things like NRAPs in those tanks, which are a level monitoring device to measure the height of the liquid in the tank, or other devices like what's called an LOW, or liquid observation well, where we send a probe down and look for the evidence of liquid in that tank where there are otherwise solids. Interstitial liquids, we discussed previously, that's what we're looking for with an LOW device. We're looking for the interstitial liquid within the solids in the tank. And so those are some pictures on the right there of those various methods we use to inspect. We conduct visual inspection inside the tanks on a periodic basis. We just actually recently completed the last of the 149 tanks baseline visual inspections in last 10 years or so. So that's concluded with some of the last CFAR tanks we inspected this fiscal year. So now we have visual inspection information from every single SST across all 149 that Eric described previously. And we can go and compare that data on a periodic basis. So we go and look again and again and again throughout the mission life. On the bottom right there, you see a picture of what we call an NRAF, which is a level monitoring device. It's a plummet on the end of a wire string, basically, I guess you could call it. It comes up to an instrument at the top at grade with a reel on it that's reeling it up and down. And we're monitoring the rotation of that reel to measure the depth of the liquid in the tank. And that helps us assess volume, helps us assess change in volume, any increases or decreases that might indicate a leak or intrusion. We monitor for those things with those devices, as well as LOWs I mentioned previously. The reason we might use a different device than an NRAP is if you have a solid surface rather than a liquid surface. You can imagine that an NRAP would work really well if you're putting that bottle on top of a liquid surface where it's all uniform and even. If that surface is not even and uniform, when you have a solid surface that's got variable height, you use an LOW in that instance typically, which gives you the ability to look for the liquid surface beneath that solid surface. More recently, in our integrity program, we've included laser scanning. So In addition to visual inspection with a camera, we put a different device down we procured recently, which conducts a 360-degree laser scan of the interior portion of the tank. That allows us to look for measured differences in the internal conditions. So if you see in-tank surface level irregularity, you can measure that and see how deep those solid pockets might be in the solid surface. That plays into our analysis of the NRAF behavior in some cases where we have an NRAF on solid surfaces. You can measure the depth of those type of indications. You can assess concrete conditions, steel conditions, and the like. With that tool, more quantitatively than you would with a visual inspection camera. We can go to the next slide and talk about the DSTs. So the DST is very similar. We have,
one of the things we mentioned last meeting is that we would really try to get away from acronyms without definitions.
Sure, absolutely.
So could you, you were talking your DST, SSTs and things, and there may be new people here that need to know what that is.
Absolutely. So a single shell tank is a SST typically. It's a very common acronym for us to say. And DST, as we say here, is double shell tank. That's what Eric described on the third slide. We have that tank within a tank, and that primary tank inside the secondary liner is sitting on what we call a concrete pad. That concrete pad's got slots in it that allow it to be cooled and allow leakage to drain to the annulus space where we can detect leakage. And so that's the difference between the two primary tank types we have. Is one has a primary containment that's confined by concrete shell and foundation. The other is a primary containment surrounded by a secondary containment with leak detection capability and then a concrete structure around that. I mentioned LOW2, liquid observation well. I mentioned NRAP. That's not an acronym. That's the name of the product. Those are all level monitoring devices that we have installed inside the tanks to measure the levels. In the double shell tanks, we have a very similar program to the SSTs with additional components. And so we conduct very similar inspections. And the purpose of, if you may not be familiar, DSTs are used operationally. We transfer waste in and out of those on a regular basis. We use those tanks to process waste out to the evaporator facility we have on site, or to in the future to our bit plant to treat waste, or to TISCR, which is currently treating waste out on site right now. That program includes structural analysis, just like the SST one does. So we do modern structural analysis, finite element analysis of various conditions in those tanks, assess things like seismic impacts, structural loading, that kind of thing. We have a waste chemistry control program for DSTs, which controls what waste goes in those tanks that would be compatible with the carbon steel structure that is containing it. We conduct non-destructive examinations. So I mentioned we do visual inspections of the SSTs in the inside of the tanks. In the DSTs, we do visual inspections in the annulus space around the primary containment. So we have annulus risers, which are pipes from the tank up to grade. We send cameras down those every 3 years to visually inspect around the perimeter of the tank and look for evidence of any changing conditions in the annulus space, whether it's corrosion of carbon steel, any evidence of perhaps leakage from the primary tank into the secondary liner. Those are all things we're looking for. In addition to visual, okay, sorry.
On your chemistry evaluations, are those based upon probes, in situ probes which are sent down, or are they based upon physical samples which you collect and then send to a laboratory?
Sure. So both is the answer. So we have corrosion probes in several tanks on site. That's electrochemical corrosion monitoring that we do. That's measuring the reference potential of the tank versus the waste and the seals containing it. We also have samples we do with sampling programs. So we sample the liquids supernatant on a periodic basis to inform our best basis inventory, or BBI, which is how we characterize the wastes in every tank. We also take solid samples on a periodic basis throughout things that have solids present in them. That's a core sample, which I'll get into a little bit here too and show some of the tools we use to do that. And that helps us characterize the waste to ensure and prove that it meets its specifications that are defined in our operating documents. Question about that? Or no? No? Okay.
Okay.
Just scratching the head. So we do that sampling to inform our waste acceptance criteria for the tank conditions. And then we have modeling also that predicts the future state of that chemistry and would trigger new sampling to verify the condition still exists to be in a safe state. In addition to that, in terms of waste chemistry control, we can talk a little bit also about how we conduct chemistry testing. This WRPS and DOE use several laboratories to conduct waste chemistry testing. That includes our local T22S laboratory on site. It includes DNVGL over in Columbus, Ohio, and it includes SRNL over in Savannah River in South Carolina. So those labs test real waste conditions or similar waste conditions against possible scenarios that we're trending towards to assess whether we have a harmful condition coming in the future, not necessarily right now. So we can be predictive in nature and make corrections if we need to prolong the life of our assets. In terms of non-destructive examinations, I mentioned we do visual inspections in the annulus space. Also in the annulus space, we do ultrasonic testing examination. So we measure the wall thickness of our carbon steel structure on the primary tank of our DSTs. That includes sending robotic crawlers, magnetic robotic crawlers, down in that annulus space between the primary and secondary on the walls of the primary tank, driving around and measuring thickness in various areas. And then we trend that condition periodically as we go through time, measuring it again and again to assess any evidence of changes. And I mentioned we have one more question back there. Go ahead.
How big is that thing?
The one on the right.
The little crawler?
Yeah, so this is a crawler that we buy. We have, I think, 2 or 3 of them now in our fleet. It's called a Edify Mag HD. It's about 10 inches in across from track to track. And the camera, it rotates full 360 around in the middle there between the magnets. We deploy that periodically through our UT examinations or ultrasonic thickness testing examinations. And allows us to have a view in the annulus space of the DST when we're moving our other crawlers around to do inspection. So you can imagine during these inspections, we're not in the farm by the tank when we're doing this work. It's down below grade, several, 50 feet below grade or so. And we have tethers that go from the tank outside the power mast off the fence line, where we have a trailer located. That trailer is where our operators sit. They drive those crawlers remotely from about 300 or 400 feet away. And they have cameras in the annulus space to watch what's going on, to make decisions about how to drive, how fast to go, where to turn, what to inspect. So we do a lot of stuff remotely on site, of course, as you can imagine, and that's one of the tools we use to do it. That's the Mag HD, which is a very good tool for us.
Clearly you need this. I haven't touched it.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. I'm getting barfed up here.
You're doing the heavy lifting.
I'm heavy lifting, yeah. Yeah, that's right. So in the top right, top left there, sorry, this is a more recent inspection we've done as part of those examinations we do in the annulus for non-destructive examination. I mentioned we have this concrete pad the primary tank sits on inside the annulus space of the DST. At the bottom of the primary tank, where it's sitting on that pad, there are slots that go underneath the tank. Those slots enable us to send tools down beneath the tank and conduct inspection also. So we developed several unique robotic crawlers to go and do that in the last 5 years or so. And we've been doing so on about 18 tanks so far. That picture you see on the top left, you can't really zoom in, it's kind of dark, but if you look at the pictures in your slides there, that's under a tank. We can go about 37 feet down below the tank from the outer edge where we're in the annulus space and take a visual inspection all the way down through that radius to the center portion. And we can look for evidence of leakage, we can look for evidence of corrosion. And we're currently developing tools to go and do volumetric examination or measuring the thickness of that steel in those areas also. On the bottom left picture, I mentioned we do sampling. That's a core sampling platform right there, which is quite enormous. It's 15 feet tall or so. It gets put on top of a tank where the riser is located to go down into the tank. And we pull cores of the waste out at the various elevations along through the waste profile. That includes supernatant, as Eric mentioned. It includes salt cake. It includes sludge. So we take those core sample pieces over to our laboratory on site, and they examine it, conduct corrosion testing on it in some cases. They conduct characterization of it to understand its current composition against our chemistry control specifications. And we do all those things routinely as a periodic basis throughout the mission life. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. That was a long one. Any questions though before I talk about tools? Got a few, okay. So go clockwise here.
Okay, one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
There's an independent tank integrity commission or
Yeah.
not exactly what the title
I
is.
can give it to you.
And how are you working with them through all of this?
Okay. So we have it's called a Tank Integrity Expert Panel.
Mhm.
They're a chartered team as part of our company. They are all external people though. They are people from academia, from industry, and from national laboratories. We meet with them for our corrosion subgroup every 2 weeks and discuss these corrosion testing results I talked about. We meet with them twice a year for the full panel and discuss our recent inspection results from that year. So that would include us talking to them in person here in Richland or over in Columbus, Ohio, in at DME's facilities where we usually meet. We present the challenges of the day to them as a part of our effort, whether it's double shell tank inspection results, whether it's SST inspection results, whether it's name your part of the program that we're gathering data on and we are evaluating that information on a constant basis. we share that with them and they provide feedback through letters and direction and recommendations to us. And we usually typically enact those recommendations where we can.
And with that committee too, so it both encompasses, I think Jason mentioned the corrosion subgroup, but there's the other subgroups as well. I mean, we have groups that are focused on structural integrity. We also have groups focused on inspection techniques like our ultrasonic testing. It really covers the wide gamut of really everything we do here with our DST and SST systems as well. I think we're going clockwise. Was there one more question?
Just clarification on the annuals that you were showing the pictures of. Is there space underneath the internal tank where you're taking pictures? This kind of looks like it's solid.
Yeah, that's a 3D model of it. It's not the greatest, but yeah, so the annulus itself is 30 inches wide, so a little under 3 feet wide. From the top to bottom, you're looking at about 40 feet from where we enter the annulus space all the way to the floor where that crawler right there in the top of our picture is sitting. Their refractory pad is about 10 inches tall in the maximum case. And so those slots, if you go kick back one slide real quick, I want to show you the slots again.
So a suggestion or request from online?
Yeah.
Because we're doing remote.
Yes.
Could you all slow down just
Oh,
a
yeah.
smidge
Sure.
so they can
Talk
follow
slower.
you a little better?
I need to breathe more anyways, I guess.
Okay, yeah, breathe.
So on that picture on the top left, you're in the slots in that picture, you're looking down the slot under a tank. Those slots are 2.5 inches wide and 2.5 inches tall also. So that's kind of the relative size you're looking at here. Kind of trying to picture it in your mind. When we're traveling down with the camera's being pushed inward pretty quickly actually. So you're looking through traveling through space with the walls flying past you. It all looks very big when you're in there, but it's actually quite small.
So are the slots defined like a pizza along the cut line?
Yes,
How
so-
often, how frequent?
Yeah, I don't have a picture of it here, I don't think. They're in a pattern. It's a tuning port style pattern. Is there a whiteboard somewhere I could draw?
Yeah.
Is there a marker?
Markers, yeah, right there.
Or, like a professor. So the other refractory pattern is round. Obviously, the tank's looking at, you're looking at top-down view right here from above. The slots are like this, and they branch in together to a point, and then they keep going on. And I have another one here, comes in, and then they branch also in to a single one, and they come in, and then these two branch together, and I have one straight section all the way to the center. So when I travel with the camera inward, I'm inserting right here, and I come down, and I make this turn, and I come in and I make this jog here, and I come in and I'm at the center portion of the tank, which is not center because I drew it poorly, but imagine this is the center of the circle. So you're setting a camera down, and then you pull it out slowly and record video along the way, and you're looking at snapshots along that path and looking for any evidence of corrosion. You see, the way I drew this, we have 4 possible paths to get to the same location as you get down here, because they net down and they get closer together throughout the middle. There are 64 slots around the perimeter of most of our tanks. So we go through 14 of those every time we do a UT. And the reason we do it that way is because in the annulus space of a DST, there's a riser here and a riser here. That's a 24-inch size riser we can send our crawlers through. In the annulus space, there are obstructions that might be here, 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 and here. We can't go around the perimeter all the way to get to other slots necessarily. We can only get to the ones available in this bound of this perimeter portion. So that's how we're limited by air slots we can access. That was helpful.
What I'll say too with the air slots is that typically, even though we are, restricted in the number of air slots we can inspect, as we've been going through these baseline inspections, typically what we find is the conditions we find in one set of air slots almost completely mimic or identical to the conditions we find on the opposite side of the tank as well. So it gives us a good sense of the uniformity of these inspections and the characteristics underneath that tank. So,
That's a good point. So
yeah.
I mentioned the air slot part. We also do UT on both sides of the tank too. So we send robotic crawlers in both these sides and conduct wall examination of the steel on both sides. Then we have comparative data on different areas of the tank. And we've found through history that both sides compare very favorably, statistically not significantly different at all. So we continue to do so, looking at more surface area spread out around the tank.
So
Online, what is UT?
So UT is ultrasonic thickness testing. We use an ultrasonic transducer, which is sound, propagating into the steel. And based on the speed of that sound, you can detect how thick the steel is. So we calibrate those tools before we deploy them in the field and measure thicknesses, and then we can measure how much thickness there is remaining on the steel in the tank wall. If there's any evidence of degradation, we detect that with the steel in terms of a wall thickness loss.
So I think we did have a few more questions here.
Go ahead.
Mine's really simple. Your core sampler there. What's the approximate dimensions of that?
Oh, good question. It's very large. We use a crane to move it. I'd say it's probably 17, 20 feet. Dan, do you know how big it is?
Well, yeah, it's around 15 feet tall, but
it's on a circular pad that will rotate.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably 20 feet across. All the equipment necessary to perform the core sampling is really on that platform. And it rotates and moves along with the core sampler itself.
What's the approximate weight, do you know? I know, I'm asking you. It's difficult,
I do
but-
not know.
It's very heavy. I don't know if the
It's
weight number,
pretty-
but it's
pretty
heavy.
heavy.
Yeah.
Thousands of pounds, certainly, thousands of pounds. It's not hundreds of pounds, that's for sure. More than a car.
But what's the disposal path of the samples?
The samples go to the lab. They are evaluated in the hot cells in the lab, and then waste from the lab goes back to tanks typically.
Goes back to where?
To the tanks, to the.
Oh, okay.
So in the case of the laboratory, it goes back to our SY farm over in West area. That's the double shell tank farm in West area that contains the waste from the
So-
laboratory.
They've got 10 slides in their presentation and we're halfway through time.
The other ones are just backup, don't worry.
Okay.
We'll be fine, don't worry.
Well, normally we save questions to the end, so
Oh, sorry.
we're
Just having a
we're
great
just
time.
being a little more free form.
That's okay. Go ahead. Who's first? I'm not sure. Go ahead. Either way.
So how many cores can you take, putting that on a tank? If it rotates and moves, how many core samples?
Okay.
And how many different locations can you take a core sample?
Understand. So we do core sampling through one riser for a tank to profile and characterize it. We can take the cores in terms of number of cores. There are, I think they're 19 inches long.
19-inch segments.
And so you can imagine, depends on how high the waste level is at that point in the tank. So if the tank is 200 inches tall in terms of waste, divide that by 19, that's how many core segments we would get out of that tank to evaluate. We don't do it in various locations around the surface area inside the tank though. We have in the past, in decades past, they've done core samples through multiple risers. Work has been done over the years to suggest that in terms of the per location in the tank, the uniformity is pretty good. In terms of depth is where you see your variation in the waste profile. So we look in one location and get the full depth core at a location to profile the different layers of the waste. It's not likely that we have variation across a particular elevation of the waste across the tank surface area. Question there?
Yeah, so are there milestones associated with the tank integrity program, and how are those going?
Yeah, so many of them have milestones in the TPA. So over the years, there have been more. We've actually closed off a lot of those relative to SSTs. The most recent milestone we will be closing is the single shell tank visual inspection. That's a milestone in the TPA. The first was to perform baseline visual inspection of all SSTs, all 149, which we've now done as of this fiscal year. The next milestone after that, which is tied to it, is to document those results in a report, which is also done now too. We're going to close that one very soon. Beyond that, there were other milestones for doing leak cause and location of SSTs. Having the DST program in general, the integrity program, kind of spawned out of TPA milestones also. I think it's called M42 series of milestones, or the ones that were related to DST integrity program development. So Eric mentioned the program's been around for a long time. We've been conducting a lot of these inspections since the beginning of time. If you consider visual inspections, since the mid-90s really is when a lot of the activities became really prominent, like the UT activities became a part of the program then, and they've been going on for several decades since. For many of the DSTs, we have 3 rounds of UT examination. We're coming up on completing that 3rd round here very soon in the next couple of years. So we'll have 3 full sets of data on wall thickness of our DSTs for every single tank, which is a pretty good achievement, I feel like. Further questions? Jim?
I think you should mention the structural integrity assessments that have been done.
Yeah, sure. So analysis of record is, I think, the term of art for it. One of the things that was recommended as part of the TBA milestone was conducting modern structural analysis of all of the SSTs and DSTs. And that was done. It's a humongous volume of work that was done by PNL and working with the contractor and other outside entities also beyond just PNL. That included modern structural analysis with seismic criteria, loading conditions, modern structural conditions of the tanks, and degraded properties of the tanks also. So these tanks have been in the ground for many decades in most cases, whether it's SSTs or DSTs. In the analysis, you degrade the properties of the concrete based on temperature, exposure, etc. And the sum of all that work was the tanks are in great structural conditions, generally speaking. So that was a large effort that was done before my time as manager, but I was part of the group and that was complete for the year.
And that was complete in what year?
Off the top of my head.
2 years ago, 10 years ago?
Jim? Years ago?
If I had to guess, I'd say 3.
No, I don't think so. I think it was more like between 5 and 10, somewhere in that range years ago.
We can get back to you on what that.
We'll figure that out. That date it should be known. The reports have dates on them, of course, they've been released, they're available. There's a report for each type of tank. So Eric mentioned there's DSTs and SSTs, single shell tanks and double shell tanks. Single shell tanks are also broken down into different categories based on their size and their type. So there's types 1, 2, 3s, and 4s. 4s broken down further into A, B, and C. So there's different sizes, and each of those different conditions was evaluated through structural analysis based on the different concrete and designs. Okay. I got it. So on next slide, maybe.
Good.
So I mentioned we're developing new tools, new methods of inspection for our integrity programs. I mentioned cameras. We use cameras to inspect whether it's an SST, a single shell tank, or a double shell tank. We've used over the years analog cameras way back in the several decades ago time, 1990s. We've progressed on to digital cameras. We use a camera called a GE PTZ70, which has been our workhorse camera for a long time. That's an analog camera. More recently, we've progressed on and bought some new cameras from a company called Sensor Networks that are higher definition, better lighting, digital video storage. So we have MP4 AVI files instead of having DVDs with recorded video footage on to watch. So that's been a great improvement. It's been a very nice change to have much better visual acuity in the videos to evaluate the conditions inside the tanks. And then one of the biggest things that we're developing right now as part of our integrity programs is volumetric inspection, or interrogating the seal thickness itself of the tank bottoms of our double shell tanks. So we're developing several tools. There's about 3 that are in progress right now to go and look at that tank bottom of the primary tank inside a double shell tank. Right now, that's inaccessible to us with our current tools. So we conduct inspection in the annulus space of a DST on the walls, which are easily accessible in that 30-inch wide space. To get under the tank with tools that can do volumetric inspection, or inspection that will inspect the steel itself and look for its thickness and look for any evidence of corrosion, we have to do some significant R&D, research and development. And that picture you see at the top right is some of that R&D. That's a tool conceived, designed, and built, and now being tested by Southwest Research Institute over in San Antonio, Texas. It's called a guided wave ultrasonic testing tool, which sends energy waves or ultrasonic waves into the plate steel of the wall and then propagates that around the bottom knuckle of the tank, under the tank, and you look for evidence of any kind of degradation. Think about sonar, for example. You're sending energy out, receiving back pulses of response from things you're going to intercept with. That's the same kind of function there that tool is going to be going to do. And there's 2 other tools that are very analogous to that. They're going to do very similar things. And that allows us to get more data about the tank bottoms, which are historically inaccessible or very difficult to inspect. In terms of degradation we observe and need to mitigate or correct, we've been working on DST repair methods also. That includes patching of localized wall areas or portable bottoms of the tank. So imagine a tank is discovered to be failed, leaks to its annulus space. You could potentially, or theoretically, clear out the internal portion of the tank, pour in a grout/polymer layered mixture on top of that, and build up a new tank bottom, verify leak integrity, verify structural capability, and then put it back in service potentially. So those are things we're evaluating as part of our Chief Technology Office within WRPS, and in coordination with DOE, of course, to go and repair tanks potentially where we have areas of degradation discovered. The bottom right picture is of cold spray patching. That is basically a method of shooting metal powder at the metal surface you're trying to repair, and it bonds that surface mechanically, and you end up with a patch that covers up that area and builds up material thickness, and therefore builds up leak corrosion allowance on that surface. Bottom left picture there is a new camera we procured recently, which is from Sensor Networks, and that's just a picture of it. It's pretty nice. On the next, please. I mentioned several inspection tools across the presentation. This is kind of a rundown of those. The top left is a visual inspection borescope we use. It's a GE Mentor IQ. It's the brand of it. It's small diameter, fits through very small openings. We can go do inspections in various areas around our site. Bottom left one there is how we inspect the air spots under tanks. It's a crawler from one of our vendors that it magnetically couples to the wall and then drives down to the bottom of the tank and then inserts the camera under the tank into the air spots and allows us to do visual inspection. The camera we actually insert is the picture there on the left, which to the right of that rather, which is a Wohler camera we use, which has pan tilt capability and onboard lighting. The one next to that is a visual inspection camera we use to do annulus visual inspection. That's a pan tilt zoom camera. It's got adjustable lighting, fits through a 3-inch opening. That's been the workhorse for a long time for the program to do visual inspections both in DSTs and in SSTs. And I mentioned earlier, that's the Mag HD. That's just a different shot of it there showing its cameras and lighting. It's got 2 spotlights, 2 floodlights, and a 1080 feet camera in the middle. It also actually has pretty cool laser lines on it too that you can use to do relative measurement in the annulus space. If you see something that you want to gauge how big it is. And the top right pictures, those are really the workhorses of the UT program, ultrasonic thickness testing program. That's a Force AGS-2 crawler with a magnetic couple wheels. And it's got an arm on the front that you see that slides back and forth. That arm delivers several different tools in the annulus. One is a tool we use to prep the surface, and the other is a tool we use to measure thickness. So that tool on the right is a pneumatically operated brush that abrades the surface, gets the loose rust off, and allows us to go and inspect a clean surface when we do our UT measurements. And then the picture on the left is just a picture of it from the brochure, which is what it looks like before we put it in a tank and deploy it down into a below grade environment. Next slide. I mentioned sampling and testing. We take samples of the waste from the tanks and then go evaluate it in our laboratory. The far left picture is of that waste being evaluated at our 222S laboratory for corrosion testing. So we put it in a hot cell environment. We have electrodes there to measure its potential. We conduct what are called CPP tests, or cyclic potentiated down polarization tests, which test for pin corrosion prevalence. That means, is it going to have localized corrosion attack in the areas of the steel surface? The top picture there is of just some waste samples at the lab, stored in little jars there in the hot cell. And the bottom picture is a extruded core sample. So I mentioned those 19-inch segments. That's what they look like in the lab when they extrude them out of the core sample itself, and then they cut up, put them in the jars like the top picture shows, and then take them off to the hot cell to evaluate them chemically. We take liquid samples I mentioned also. The picture there of a liquid grab sampler is basically, think of it as a bottle on string essentially. You drop it down through the riser, so you submerge it in the surface, and you open it up, and you fill up that bottle with waste, take it to the lab, evaluate that waste in a lab environment. And the far right picture is what the core sampling drill looks like. That shows the various components of it, which is not very important, but I just want to point out that's the tool we use. It's what's being driven down through the waste surface as we gather core samples along the height of the tank waste profile. Go ahead, next slide, please. Questions at all before we move on to the last conclusions here?
Jason, I was just going to mention, there was a previous question about how much the core sample platform weighed. I looked it up. It's approximately 24,000 pounds.
Okay, thank you.
So a few cars.
A few cars, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Further questions before we go into some conclusions?
Yeah, so really tying it back then, so this program is, really we recognize it as a key element of the ultimate hampered tank waste mission. Safely managing this waste is a top priority for us. And that's why we have such a robust program that we've gone through here. So many different elements that we're continuing to adapt and evolve for these tanks heading forward, as well as looking to new technologies and techniques as well. We did get that, the question earlier about, outside input through our tank integrity expert panel. So that's one of the forms that we do that through. Engaging with other experts in other fields as well is something that we routinely do as part of this program. It's actually, baked in as a programmatic element to help mature and advance the program as we head into the future. So I appreciate your time, everyone. I think that's most of what we got here. So I do want to open up for any other questions that we may have.
I've got folks in queue, and I want to check in with ecology.
I've got Nina.
You've got Nina? Ah, there she is. So we'll check in with ecology, and then we'll go to the queue.
Yeah, I wanted to thank these two gentlemen here. It was a really good presentation, and I learned something out of it, so that's pretty good. I did want to mention that ecology gets to attend the integrity panel meetings, and we really appreciate having that input too, and being able to listen to what the various experts have to say. Part of the questions was the TPA milestones. I anticipate, in fact, I'm pretty sure that when Ref 9 of the record permit comes out, that those requirements for the inspections, visual integrity assessments is going to be included in the record permit. Other than that, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So first in queue is Marissa Merker. For those of you who haven't met Marissa, She's the interim vice chair of this committee, and she works with the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho. So Marissa, what's your question?
Hi, thank you, Ruth. My question is, you mentioned technologies for repairing the double shell tanks. Do you have any, or are you working on any for the single shell tanks?
We do not have any at the moment for single shell tanks. Single shell tank access is very limited, so those tanks are not fit for use because they don't have leak integrity, generally speaking. They don't have a secondary containment that's approved and is authorized. So the only mode of operation for those is closure and retrieval. So we don't have a method, I guess, of preparing those tanks for service, essentially. We are accessing DSTs from their annular space, or I guess from the internal portion of the DST if it were to be empty, to go and conduct repairs, but not on the SSTs, no, not this time.
And we're still going through, the technology evaluations for this right now. There's no field deployable product that we have. This is still very much in the early stages, but we did want to highlight it as something that we are looking at.
Sure, that's very fair, yeah.
So I saw hands in the room. I didn't catch them all. Pam, I saw yours. Were there other hands up that I missed?
Right.
Rob, okay, Pam.
Years ago, Dirk, who was a member of this committee, and a couple others had the opportunity to listen in to the tank integrity panel conversations. I attended a couple times. Is that opportunity available now? And it was extraordinarily informative to me to listen to the history of how the tanks failed, some on the first day, and to get a sense of what the challenges are. And now, since we have remote opportunities, I think the chair of this committee in particular should listen in periodically.
Sure. So for the tank integrity for panel annual meeting we do invite the members of the ecology as well as members of the HAB. I think.
Yeah,
You were in the room.
I
remember seeing your face, yeah, and it was, I guess,
Yeah.
June, July, and he's on the phone, yeah. We do extend the offer to other folks to join too, beyond the HAB, not just the HAB either. I think the tribes have been involved there and been invited in the past also, so it's not a lockdown session by any means at all. It's a great place to come and learn about what's going on in the integrity programs. We share very openly, actually, about the stuff we have going on and the challenges we face, so, yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, absolutely.
Rob.
Yeah, I did want to mention the tank expert panel integrity for that program. A former member of the board, Todd Martin, he used to be our chair, and that he's now a facilitator. He's been the facilitator of that group. And he's always been open to anybody that would like to listen in to the conversations, as well as see some of the presentations. I attended for years these meetings. So some of the questions I do have for you though is at the last integrity meeting, there was a healthy discussion of out of compliance waste. And that we've been doing a lot of the corrosion testing and finding that maybe the sodium pickup or the nitrate down or whatever. So it didn't seem like there was an answer yet at the last integrity meeting. What's the plans to come up with the answers to make our waste compliant?
Okay, so start at the beginning a little bit, maybe work through what we've done in the last couple of years. So there are 4 tanks we did. We recently changed our chemistry control specifications to make them more stringent than they previously were. That's the base, based upon a lot of the lab work I talked about previously. We do a lot of lab work at those 3 laboratories I mentioned to evaluate different scenarios and test for any propensity for corrosion in various scenarios. We did core sampling on several tanks. That includes tank AY101, tank AN106, AN107, and AN102. That data is evaluated by a program we have, which evaluates the risk of corrosion with that actual waste data we gather from the tanks. So we did that at our laboratory here on site. We send off seminal formulation to our laboratory over in Columbus, Ohio. And what they do at that lab is to make a more conservative simulant by adding reducing inhibitors and adding aggressive species in that simulant. All that say is we make a conservative simulant and then test that in a lab environment to detect whether our waste composition is good or bad in terms of causing corrosion in the tank. From that point, we've now evaluated 3 of those 4 tanks, AN106, AN107, and AN101. All of those through that process have resulted in the low risk, non-conforming waste composition for the tank. And through that testing analysis, it shows that the waste is not detrimental to the tank. So we've now changed our operating specification document to reflect that and to allow that chemistry specification for those particular cases where we have evidence and we have testing that shows it's okay. The last of those 4 is AN102, which is going to be core sampled in FY23 this next year. So we'll core sample that tank. We'll take a very similar process for that one. And that'll be taking the waste out of AN102, evaluating in a lab environment, conducting simulants. Basically, simulants are a made up solution of the same composition of the waste that's actually in the tank, same properties, and then test that in a scenario at the lab where we test that, and then also change that simulant to make it more aggressive than it otherwise would be from the tank itself, and then test that and see if it meets the requirements still for not causing any evidence of corrosion. So that's how we approach it.
What do you mean by making it more aggressive?
So it's a good question. In our chemistry control specifications, there are certain species of our waste that are aggressive to corrosion and that are inhibitory to corrosion. Some of those species that are aggressive, things like chlorides, fluorides, and then we have things like nitrate, nitrite in the tank. Their ratio of those also affects the corrosion potential of the waste. And so we have created an empirical factor called a pitting factor for our tanks, which is a chemical equation, which with the inhibitors species on top and their molarities and the aggressive species on the bottom and their molarities. When making it more aggressive, we reduce the molarity of the inhibitory species and we increase the molarity of the aggressive species. And that causes the waste to be more aggressive to corrosion from what we otherwise would find in the tank itself. And then we can test a bounding case on away from where the actual waste is and say, okay, the waste is safe, but is it safe when we add margin to that and make it worse than it otherwise is? And we test those margins, say if in the margins it's still okay. So we say the waste that here it is okay, because we know if we change it to make it more aggressive, it's still okay. And that's kind of the general way we approach it. There's a whole program document that explains how we do that process, from taking waste from the tank core sample through the whole testing evolution to saying it's either high or low or medium risk. In the case that 3 we've done, they all resulted in low risk. And that's general summary.
So then potentially bringing out of spec waste would, a lot of folks think that we would be adding things.
So go ahead. You might have to do that one. So yeah, with some of our waste, right, we're able to impact directly. We can do chemical additions to the waste to help change the composition of that. If, in a conservative manner, if we identify, hey, we want to tweak this a little bit, we can perform caustic additions, raise the pH, adjust the nitrate composition, and actually directly, change that chemistry to impact that. So the testing we've done, when we talked about this before, it's really, we conservatively selected those 4 tanks that Jason was mentioning based on our rule of thumb that we have, based on our specifications for what we consider bounding, and then through that additional testing, we found them to be to not be at an increased risk of corrosion.
A critical point there too, just to follow up on that. You mentioned we have supernatant waste, we have salt cake, and we have solid sludge, right? This waste that's out of spec is not in the supernatant layers. It's in this interstitial liquid layer down in the solids beneath that. So our ability to add caustic to impact that liquid, that out of spec waste, is more limited. So we have to take the core sample data from that waste, test it in the scenario to make sure it's not detrimental to the tank. So if it were to be, if it were resulting in a high risk, we are in a different ballpark than having to take actions to try and mitigate those interstitial liquids and the solids that we wouldn't otherwise do if we just have liquids on top we could mix, or we could add caustic to, like Eric described.
2 more questions. The second one would be in your visual inspections and your phased array inspections and these kind of things that you're doing in the channels. Are you looking at, you're only looking at the tank. Are you also looking at the liner?
We look at both. So in the annulus space, when we do visual inspection or UT, we inspect both the primary tank and the secondary liner.
Okay.
The primary tank's of course in front of you, the camera rotates all the way around and looks at the whole place. We look at the bottom of the tank down where the primary tank rests on that concrete pad it sits on. We look at those air slots along the perimeter to look for any evidence that we get waste through those. We do UT examination, ultrasonic thickness examination on the walls of the tank. We also look at the secondary liner floor. In some cases, across the population sample, we look at the walls of the secondary liner also. And so all that gives us data we then trend over time for the condition of those different areas of the structure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'd just like to encourage anybody in the tank waste committee that would like to get invited to these. Please give me a call and I'll call Todd or whoever to make sure that you have the phone number and you can have an invite. It's a very high level and there's a lot of really smart guys in there. You know, some of you may know
Not
from
me.
locals, but, well, you know.
Smarter
Yeah,
than
you
me.
know, I've worked with many of them, already, so, then, I guess the last question was answered in that last discussion, so, thank you.
No problem, absolutely. Further questions around the room?
Anyone?
Put y'all to sleep yet?
Don't have anybody online.
So then maybe another question would be, how are you using the information that we gained from the tanks that have failed? Of course, we recognize we have roughly 20 or so that we have designated as, we don't put any more liquid in.
Talking about the SST, you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of SST,
And even the double, the 102.
yeah, so the 102 is the one DST we have, but it's
Right.
not filled with waste currently, because it's
Right.
emptied, right? We retrieved that tank. I can take that one if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So a lot has been learned from tanks or assets that have failed. So we do forensic examination when we observe degradation of our tanks or failure of tanks. When A102 failed we discovered it back in 2012 through inspection. All of the work we've done to develop tank bottom inspection methods has been the result of that. So we've got tools now to go under tanks that we didn't have before because we discovered tank bottoms were a challenge and we had to go and find tools to go inspect that. We are developing very novel and very cutting edge technology to go inspect those tank bottoms with volumetric tools. That's the three I mentioned previously. That's the result of A102 also, having been failed. And we discovered through visual inspection during that time at the bottom of the tank is where that failure occurred. There's pitting corrosion on the tank bottom due to a very thin layer of out-of-spec waste at that bottom layer. So we need to develop tools to go and do that. Other than inspection, core sampling of wastes, we now core sample much closer to the tank bottom than we did previously. We use a method called the syringe method, which allows you to suck waste up from the very bottom of the tank to analyze its condition right there in contact with the tank bottom itself. That's been an addition based on the results we had for A102. And beyond, there's lots of other areas where that's the case. Things like developing laser scanning capability is another case where we're expanding the program to get better data in SSTs, for example, where we know that we never had it previously. So we look at the data as a feedback loop. We look at the program as a feedback loop. We gather data, we assess the conditions we find, and we say, okay, we need to change our frequencies, we need to get a better tool, those kind of things based on what the results tell us. Secondary liners is another example of that. We inspect all secondary liners of all DSTs now on the annual score. We didn't do that previously before 2014. The program improved based on the data we gather. And where we have concerns for different failure mechanisms, we might want to track. Okay. Anything else?
If not, thank you everyone for your time. Really do appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to come back next year, no problem.
Thank you.
Thanks for the water.
All right. So we're scheduled for a break. We're running a smidge early, so let's come back at 2:25 for open forum. 2:25. Cool. So if you have not yet signed in, either via chat or via the hard copy in the room, would you please do so? Because we do try to keep track of
Once you get to Dow.
who's at meetings, and we are actually, because now we're doing things hybrid, we're also trying to get a sense of what proportion of people show up in person and what proportion log in. Because as we collect that information over the next few months, that will actually help us figure out what meeting room size we need and what's in it for you. If we spend less on renting meeting rooms, there is more available for your travel. So letting us know that you're here, and if you're here in person or online, actually is in your budgetary best interest. We're still missing Ron.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, well, here he is.
I'm excited for the tour.
Joe, that's right. Great.
When's the last time you were-
Just in case, if you're online and you're signing in via chat, we'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Maybe more.
Hopefully our folks online can hear us reasonably well, and maybe you can even see some of us at this point.
Secretary.
The owls aren't screeching. Are we ready to go, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. What I'd like to do here in this open forum is, I went through our last meeting minutes, and there were several unanswered questions or questions that came out by the members that maybe we should want to discuss and see if we need DOE to enlighten us. And so, for example, in Janet's talk at the last meeting, she had mentioned that there would be a second TSCR being worked on and developed. There was also some discussion here about there's certain resins that will also handle the iodine and the strontium, no, technetium, sorry, iodine and technetium, and whether we wanted to delve a little bit more into that question. And that's just the first one that I hit. There's a couple others. I wanted to remind people on the board that the Phoenix program is up and running, and please spend some time and take a look at it. It's a PNL program, and the actual website is listed in the minutes. And so I think we probably, Delmar had mentioned several things about some upgrades going on to the LAW or the DF log, and wondering if any of those modifications or those upgrades are something that we want to pay attention to, or are these being done for reasons of better compliance, better, that activity, or are they simply upgrades for make the machine work better? I know Jeff Lyon talked a lot about the retrievals going on. He was very excited about that. And if people can remember back, we used to have what was called the Easter egg chart. Some of us referred to it as Easter egg chart, where it was a display of all the tanks out there and which ones were empty and which ones had so much and had different levels for what was in them, or illustrations showing whether this is sludge or whether it's citronate or et cetera. I think that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more because we are the tank committee. We should understand that a little bit better. Yes.
I just wanted to make sure you're aware that in 2 weeks at the full board meeting, on the second day, we have a chunk on DF law.
Right.
So any questions you may want to feed to Gary that can go over to Matt Irwin so he could possibly be prepared to answer those questions.
Okay, excellent. So if we want to take some notes right now, the board here, or the committee, Tank Waste Committee, what you read, hopefully people read the minutes, and were there some questions that you had? I always thought that idea of the second TSCR and the evolution of the TSCR for the treatment of waste was something that's real exciting. And I felt that yes.
Continue.
I just felt it was real exciting, and I was kind of waiting for input from folks that might, do you want to ask more questions on that? If so, then I will factor that up to
Follow up with what Susan said about maybe bringing to Gary's attention some topics that might be discussed in that DF law. Every month, Office of River Protection publishes a consent decree monthly report. And that consent decree monthly report basically says, are we behind schedule or ahead of schedule in various activities? And are they costing more, costing less than are budgeted? And for several months now, at least the last 3 months, they've noted that that DF law is behind schedule in certain activities and is costing more for a number of issues. These include the testing and maintenance of law facility mechanical systems for waste container receipt, handling, and finishing, the law facility off-gas system testing and tuning, the discovery of instrument performance and control system anomalies, ongoing challenges encountered during auto sampling system testing, and design modifications to the last formal reagent system. So I'm thinking, Gary, maybe these are some things that might possibly be discussed in a presentation on DF law. Because they are leading to significant schedule variances and cost variances in the DF law program on a month-to-month basis and cumulative.
And I'm willing to take questions for DF law. If you could get those to me yesterday, because I need them very quickly, because we're finalizing.
Good job.
Finalizing that brief. So this helpful. Thank you, Chris.
Josh, how feasible would it be from this discussion to capture any questions from this to give to tonight's report to Gary? Is that doable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I also note that Ecology today issued a permit mod for the DF lot with a lot of interesting things. When I skimmed it over, there was a lot of instrument changes, modifications, and the permits that Ecology was going to authorize had to do a lot with the upgrades there. So, so how those factor into what Chris here was saying would be important. Okay. Another thing on
So do you
my.
want us to add any questions?
Yeah, I would say if Gary needs questions yesterday, the fastest way to get them to him is for you all to daylight your questions. At the end of committee days, Josh actually puts together a really high-level summary for DOE. And that's why I asked him if it's possible to put those in. So Gary literally gets them tonight.
And the intent of the briefing that we have for the board meeting is a high-level introduction, as it were, because there's going to be a lot of people who never heard anything about the waste treatment plant and DF law. So it is purposely written at a high-level intro type for the so looking at some of these questions, able to get into earned value management, because that gets deeper than what we can do is look at having that at a
It's
different
the
time.
technical stuff, not the earned
Yeah.
value system stuff.
Yeah, so,
Somebody muted the microphone.
The different companies, Val was there, Brian,
it may be similar.
they didn't define TISPR. They just kept throwing out the acronym.
Okay.
So what I'm saying, Gary, is I want Matt to be as successful as possible in providing us information that we are interested in,
Sure.
are concerned with. So if we have questions that are top of our mind, serious questions, that in 2 weeks, we're gonna ask when the subject comes up, I'd rather Matt know that those questions will be coming.
Oh.
So he's got that information, those questions in his back pocket, and even if it's not part of his presentation, he's prepared to address those questions.
Oh, and I get that, and I agree, and I do plan to take this to him, but depending on how deep you want to go, we may be looking at a presentation at a later time.
So, we just, OHCB just went on a tour yesterday. And the.
Who is that?
Oh, you have to pay for it. Sorry, acronym. When we were at the waste treatment, the DF law, direct feed low activity waste plant, the startup heaters are in the know. And they're wired and they're supposed to be starting heating by the end of the week. So it's a 10-day period that's gonna take to get up to temperature. So it would be good to have an update on what the temperature of Melter 1 is, as part of the briefing, which is gonna be a little more than 10 days from now.
And to be specific, Josh, that I wanted to ask about the second tester and the development there, and as well as what alternatives are being looked at. She also mentioned that maybe a modified tester, I don't know.
All right. Dan, hold on. Todd Meyer, who is an incoming board member, had a question about the monthly consent decree reports. Todd, do you want to speak or do you just want me to read your question?
Where can I find a link to those reports? I searched and I could find individual ones, but I can't find a page where they are listed.
Chris, can you help him with that?
Yeah, if you go to hanford.gov and go to the administrative record, and then in the search, do CD consent decree monthly report, and then go to, on the left-hand menu, to 2022, you'll get a list of the consent decree reports that have been put out for 2022, but they're in the administrative record.
Thank you.
All right, Stan, Solid.
Well, I've got one up in the sky and one down in the weeds. Where are we on the DEFLA training, management, and retention? I'd like to be updated on that, and crewing. And the one down in the weeds is, I know that they're using the Tisker and storing Supernate that's been through the resin. I'm just wondering if there isn't a concern or at least an inquiry about settling, because it's going to sit there in that tank for we don't know how long, but probably about a year.
I was under the impression it's all soluble. No solids.
It's going to form a precipitation column, and any solid there is.
No, I think
they're all unsolid. They're all liquid. Everything through that tank is liquid.
Filtered before Tisker, so it should be.
Okay.
So it was liquid when it went into Tisker.
Yeah.
Well, it was liquid with solids in it when it went into Tisker, and hopefully Tisker got all of it. But it was sitting there for a year, and it didn't get all of it.
So for the folks on the phone, Ryan Miller put in a link to the Hanford administrative record in the chat, so you can hopefully make it easier to find. Are there other questions? Dan, other questions?
Just on a technical level, is there a way to save that after the meeting's finished if you're in Zoom, or is there a way to keep that chat?
Oh yeah, the chats are kept.
Chats are kept,
Yeah.
okay. How, well, I'll email you to ask you how.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, the chats are kept inside of Teams.
Inside Teams.
Yeah. And for a number of the links, Josh will pull them out, stick them in the meeting minutes.
Okay.
So you don't have to slog through how many queues we had.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me continue on. I know that there was a discussion about the barriers on the farms. And I think that certainly that ought to be touched on, how many of the tanks are now protected with the barriers. Another note that I had was, Dan, you'd mentioned that, and being on the evaporator, I am, you'd mentioned that it's an old machine and they're doing a bunch of upgrades to it. And I guess my question would be, have we had a reliability assessment done on the machine? I think that's something in my throat. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I expect it to last for another couple of decades.
Yes.
So, right, yeah. Will it?
And that's about it, I think, the important stuff. Yeah. So we're in a open forum at this point. Anybody else would like to say?
So let's make sure that if there are any other questions that Josh needs to capture to send on to DOE tonight.
Excuse me for a second.
If not, so for those of you who were, now I'm doing it. For those of you who were in the PIC meeting this morning, I actually put the chair on the spot every time and said, okay, explain what open forum is to new members who may not know what that is.
It's Rob's turn.
Put it back.
Okay. I didn't warn him I was going to put him on the spot. So Rob, I was remiss at the front end of open forum this morning. I actually asked the chair to help folks who may be new and didn't know what open forum was, for the chair to say, this is what open forum is in this committee. So can we sort of back it up a little bit and you explain to the members and the new members what the purpose of open forum is and how they can participate?
I think for the most part, it is kind of self-described. Any of the members can speak. Anybody that's interested can speak. We'd like to understand what issues are bothering you, what or questions that you might have about the project, and where this open forum can be an interchange, and people like Tom, Dan, Chris, others in here, Pam, have been with the board a very long time. And they can help explain to any new members what it is that they may be concerned about. That's really what an open forum is. And so please speak up. I'm anxious to hear what we can be working on. As far as the board goes, the committee goes, is we have 4 IMs, issue manager groups, that have been formed. One involving the evaporator, one involving the grout, one involving integrity, and the other involving, what's the other one?
Lateral flow.
Lateral flow, that's it. Lateral flow, which is a joint one with RAP. And if we want, I can describe a little bit what each one are doing. In the case of grout, actually, Susan, you have energy here. Do you want to describe what you're thinking now about grout?
What I'm thinking is that as a public representative of the public, I've noticed several articles in the recent months, recent 6-ish months, asking about the viability of grout and why are we not pursuing it. I understand there's a lot of history on this topic, but also the National Academies is looking at the topic also, and it is due to come out with a report next year. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you. He's been following it a little, and Jeff Barrett was the resident expert on the topic.
It's about their 4th report on it.
So I think it's time to, as we get closer to actually starting glass with inlet low activity waste, I think it's time to start talking about grout as an alternative. Low activity waste facility was never planned to deal with all of the low activity waste on the site. Alternative measures were always in the conversation and in the planning. How that's done is always in question, and its demonstration projects have gone on over the last 20 years. But I think it's time to start talking about the potential of grout as we know more about the chemistry and about the complexities of our waste as well as the viability. I'm not saying do advice anytime in the immediate near future, but I think it's time to start having those discussions and gathering the information and making ourselves a little bit smarter on it so that we can provide advice when we've got something, we got our hands around something.
Thank you.
Well, the test bed initiative, what's the progress, what's the future, how's that looking, where's it going, how soon do we get there?
There isn't, there hasn't been an issue manager team on the test bed initiative.
Well, I think it's folded into Grout.
Yeah, I see.
And Tisker.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that, you know, that's a really good area for the inquiry that we need. And I do think that we need some answers, or would like to better understand that. It's a troubling, because what I think one of the big things is that we all talk about grout, and we have dozens of companies out there wanting to produce high technical grade grouts out there and want to do experiments with us and that sort of thing. I don't think that we can see past the regulatory issues. And I see that if anything, the technology may be perfect, but regulatory wise, what would we have to do to convince ourselves and possibly the state of Washington, or possibly the state of Oregon, or whoever the interested parties are, that grout would be a way of immobilizing this waste, of the low activity waste. And yet we understand that we're still stuck on that. We've had this attitude that is as good as glass, and that really worked well in like 1996 through probably 2005, where it looked like that a second melter, a LAW melter, would be on the plans. But now that we're seeing with decay, the natural attenuation of the radioactive species that is in most of the LAW, and the other things going on, things like half-lives and specific activities that we need to assure ourselves what they are. But my point is that we need to ask the questions: what do we need? What we need to know? And yeah,
I think it's really simple. The state of Washington is concerned that tank waste is going to be grouted and it won't leave the state. So I think a really simple solution is they only permit batches. And when they leave the state, you permit the next batch. I think it's really simple. They don't want grouted waste to stay here. They want it vitrified.
Right, and that's been, I would agree with that. That's the position that's going on. It says, the question is that can we help, can the state, can people help us show that having grouted low-level waste immobilized in the state of Washington, it is of a similar risk to having a glass log of low-level waste stored in Washington.
I could talk a little bit, and I might be, I'm not as well read on the National Academy Studies as others, but my understanding is one of the things that one of the options is to do off-site grout for the first X number of years and collect a lot of data on that grout that's being shipped somewhere else, so that you can support the argument that it is as good as glass. Benefits would be they would move most of the tech and iodine rich low activity waste off-site in that first wave, so you're buying extra capacity there as well. But I want to see that report done before I try to have a coherent discussion about it.
I think Pam's right, small bites first, and that's what it's gonna take to sell legislation.
Do we have test bed on this schedule? Because that's really the small bite.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know, the test bed initiative is that there's a plan, and people can correct me if I'm going too brief on this. There's a plan to ship about 2,000 gallons of LAW waste to a facility and have it grouted, and then have that grout taken off-site to the repository in Texas. It's a private.
Waste control specialist.
Yes, waste control specialist. So, that's the first small bite, and I think that, does anybody know concisely why it's stalled out now?
2 people. Sorry.
Okay, so, so what I think that maybe, how can we do it?
So.
I don't know how we could convince DOE, or, I mean, I don't know how we convince DOE, but I mean, the state and state of Washington and Oregon, that we should proceed with this.
I think, to me, we said it earlier, it's a case of first, we have to get our head around what all the challenges are before we can do anything. We've got to find, we're gonna need, this is for down the line, because we're gonna need the National Academy's report, but we can also make ourselves smarter by having a presentation from the regulators, from their perspectives on what they believe the challenges are. And we can do our own data gathering and hear possibly from experts, not, like,
right.
And get our heads around what we believe all the challenges are, and then be able to go in with a high level advice saying, this is what we think. This is our advice that you need to consider. This is not going to be, to me, this is a long-term type activity. It's not a short-term. This is going to take the next year or 2.
So I'm looking at the provisional work plan, and I've got 2 hands in the room. On the schedule, neither grout or test bed initiative is tagged as a high level. On the work plan itself, Tank Waste Committee, item 4 is low activity offsite waste disposal. So it's sort of there. The tactical question in terms of supporting you is, you have an IM team on grout. What does the committee want to task that IM team to do to further the conversation? That would be my question to you, but I've got Jeff and Chris's hands up, and Tom. Jeff?
Jake?
Jake.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have name tags here.
Sorry.
No, yeah, no problem.
I was having a Burrite flashback, sorry.
I'm being compared to him, he's a lot better looking than I am. But, regulatorily, I see, or let me stop and look from the HAB, based on the conversations I've had with people, especially through the IMT, I think we're gonna have a hard time getting consensus with something that tells DOE and the tri-parties that we think grout good to go, right? And so there might be some part of that though that we could find consensus. Now we step back to Jake's opinion, and it's flavored by a guy who's spent his whole life trying to be an expert on tank waste chemistry. And because of that, I'm not a grout guy, but I understand some of the things that they say better than they do. And I watch how people can torpedo grout. And one of the things I want you to realize is that term grout means giant. It's about equivalent to calling something a mammal. A mouse and an elephant are both mammals, and both of them you could probably treat their headaches with ibuprofen in both cases. But there are enormous differences as well. And I watch people take the mouse issue and apply it to the elephant all the time. And that spins people up. And, so I'd be careful with this catch-all grout, because I can tell you there's some aspects of grout that I would be the biggest cheerleader for, and there is some that I would be a major person against.
And, you know, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. It's because I know that the word grout is equivalent to calling something a mammal, and there's a giant range of conditions within that gets called the word grout. Grout is more or less means that you have stuff held together with some sort of cement. And chemically, there's a billion types of cement, and there's a billion types of things being held together by it. And within that, you know, there might be, I believe that there is some applications for Hanford. I don't believe everybody is, but what I'm hoping that you'll believe is that this word, don't get caught up on the word grout and trying to apply everything you hear about grout universally, because I do not believe that to be true.
All right. I've got Chris, Tom, and Steve.
Yeah, I spent 12 years at the Fernald site, which is closed now. And the last major job we had to do was initially to vitrify waste in 2 large silos. That was the highest radium barium waste in the world. And originally we were going to vitrify it. And in a pilot plant designed to go from small studies to pilot scale studies, on third shift one night, the waste burned a hole in the melter. And that ended vitrification at Fernald. We wound up grouting the waste. We did have regulatory approval from EPA and the state of Ohio, and ultimately the waste was shipped to McAndrews, waste control specialist in Texas. I wound up, God help me, as the lead process engineer on grout design for hot ops and so on and so forth. And what we discovered, we did the same thing. We sent large volumes of waste to independent people to have it grouted, to come up with grout. And there's a big difference between doing small scale studies with grout and building a plant to grout waste on a continuous control basis. And what we found is when we started hot ops with a full scale plant, we had to throw out all the previous studies that were done. The recipes didn't work, and we had to start from scratch. And that's the difference between a plant setting and, say, laboratory setting. So that's something just to bear in mind. When you scale something up from pilot plant scale to a large plant to run things automatically, there's a whole series of issues and problems that have to be addressed that you never have to address when you're doing small scale studies. And this is what we found at Fernald with grout. Now, ultimately, we were successful. I think that's one of the reasons I'm bald right now, because I'm sure I lost a lot of my hair when we went from coal commissioning to hot ops and found that things didn't work as we expected. So that's my caveat too. But we did have regulatory approval. We had DOE approval. And so maybe that's something we could look at to see how did we get regulatory approval, because the state of Ohio probably had same concerns as the state of Washington is going to be, but we did get their approval.
What year was this, Chris?
We finished up at Fernald, I think in 2006, we shipped the last of the cast cloth to waste control specialists in Texas. Once we started plant ops, we had 9 months to do it, and we shipped 3,700 cast cloth. These were 6-foot casts, 5 feet wide, and I think you could put something like 3,800 pounds of waste in them per cast.
Are they doing any analysis of this since they've been put to rest? Are they looking at it now that it's been there for 15 years?
Say that again?
Are they doing any type of study on the concrete blocks? Surveillance. Any surveillance activity?
I don't think they are. I think the casks are sealed and they're sitting there. And the major concern we have with the cask integrity was to make sure that there was no freestanding water on top of the grout. there's no bleed water, as is grout cured. And we handle that problem. So unless the calves start rusting, I don't think there should be any issues. Now, our waste obviously is going to have a different composition than the waste here at Hanford. So it'd be hard to use one as a model for the other.
I've got Tom Cecilia and Steve Anderson. Tom?
Yeah, between Jacob and Chris, I'm picturing a mouse-sized science experiment that's getting scaled up to a plant. It's elephant-sized mouse. It's fun. So science experiments. I just wondered if anyone can tell me, because I don't know and I haven't followed it closely, is test bed tied up with ballistics? Is it a separate beast? Does anybody know?
I don't know if we have the right
Yeah.
titles in the room to say we can't talk about holistic negotiations.
You know as much as I do about
Okay.
Pam suggested 2 names and didn't give them to us.
Right. Okay, that's all I had.
Steve, I have you on the list.
Oh, I kind of just jump in whenever, sorry.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think just back to the point, Chris makes an excellent argument with the experience he has, is that we just need to get those experts in the room to digest the information that we have from 2 or 3 different perspectives to really being able to come up with some advice. And that's, to me, what the committee is all about.
I can't help but go back to the beginning on this, the fundamentals. The fundamentals is that DOE's been directed by Congress through the Waste Policy Act to immobilize the waste and geologic dispose of it. Okay, that's what we're doing. So if we can stick to the immobilization aspects of grout, is it successful? Can it be done? Can it be done on a quality basis? Can the overpacks work? I mean, if we can successfully say that we can immobilize it in something other than glass, and it's going to be immobilized through its period of radioactivity, 200 years, 300 years, whatever, for which, this last week or 2 weeks ago, I was over in Loch Ness looking at this old castle, and they use grout. Now is like 500 years old or more. So it's a stable structure, and it seems to me if we approach it on, can it be successfully immobilize that waste for the period of time necessary? Why isn't it acceptable? And let's have people argue back. What is the reason why that they won't accept that then? Because if it can be stamped and verified as being immobilized and it's not going to spread out, it seems like that would be the path to go to get these things moving.
I think Rose is in queue, I think, but
yes,
I just want to say, in order to do that, that's a dissertation. That's not advice, because the technical committee would have to do research, provide evidence that, and define what immobilization is, for how long, for what radionuclides. That's
what disposal medium.
Right, and what disposal medium, and I think.
Oh, and I'm not so suggesting that we do that.
Okay.
It's that we need to ask the questions, can they guide their studies to answer those questions, and then it'll be self-evident. Hopefully.
But that's it. We're supposed to be providing high-level
Yeah.
advice, not doing
Yeah.
research projects.
Right.
Because we're supposed to be able to stay high level
Right.
and common sense.
And I think the national academies are gearing that same way. They're they want this to proceed. And so, I maybe we just look at it from that standpoint.
And I'm gonna, as a representative of the public, I'm gonna just say, like I said, it's been several times that between Gary Peterson and Jim Conca have written articles push, pro-grout? And why is the site not investigating and looking at pursuing that as an alternative means, not replacing VIT, but as an alternative means to dealing with the residual low-activity waste?
So I've got two people in queue, and they can't jump in as easily as the rest of us. Ryan, you've got a note here. Did you have a question or?
Just a general comment, or let Rose go first.
Okay, so Rose, I'll go back to Ryan. Rose, what's on your mind?
I just put a question in the chat. I guess I'm confused. How you're defining success of grouting. There's really, to say that there's examples of X amount of years, we're talking about a long-term situation here. And so I guess I just don't understand how we can define success of grouting to be able to really consider what you guys are all talking about.
Back to what are the questions that have to be answered to have that conversation? Ryan.
Yeah, let me preface my comment by saying, like I said to Tom's question, I'm not, that's like a couple levels above me, so I don't know if grouting is part of that or to the extent if it is. That being said, if the HAB is interested in bringing multiple perspectives in to talk about positions on grout, I'm sure I could at least make the ask to my management to have some folks come in and talk to you guys and answer your questions and share our position on drought. So it seems like there's some speculation about college's stance on drought to varying degrees in this room and across the board, as I've gathered from the media and other avenues. I'd be happy to meet you guys, clarify our position, and answer questions from the ecology perspective. So that's it. I think the campaign committee meeting. I just wanted to share that. But I could, at the very least, make the ask, and I'm sure somebody will talk to you guys about it.
Yeah, and I think that it's changed as the closer we get to the VIT plant starting. I believe, this is just Sue speaking from being around the site for a long time, that I believe that the ecology position is changing as opposed to what it was 20 or 30 years ago when we were just talking about the VIT plant. As we get close to actually operating, I think the opportunities are changing because trust is coming into play.
Yeah.
Because again, we don't want to, the trust part was we don't want to believe that the department will ditch VIT and go to grout because it's cheaper and easier, without, blinking.
Yeah, and I think it's safe for me to share this. The ecology, we're supportive of the ongoing discussion of grouting some of the low-activity waste and sending it offsite for disposal, as kind of been mentioned in the room. And of course, that's about the 2,000 gallon phase 2 of the test bed initiative, and we're kind of standing by and we're ready to process the application once ecology receives the application. So I can share that.
Interesting open forum.
So DOE needs to tell us where they are in putting the application together for the test bed initiative.
So the ask of DOE is information on the status of test bed initiative? Is that what you're asking?
The status of their application to ecology.
The status of the test bed initiative application to ecology?
Yes.
And where that is?
Anything related, yeah. When is the next tank waste committee meeting?
On the calendar, it's February 8th, and the high-level topic that's pegged in the provisional work plan is the waste treatment and immobilization plant updates.
Seems like it might be a fun conversation to have a bunch of ground experts talk, because you'll have the draft National Academy report out. It won't be the final one, but yeah, that could be a fun ground workshop. That'd be awesome.
And you've got a good 5 minutes to think about it, because the next agenda item is committee business, which includes what do you want to talk about in February?
That's it. I vote. That's it.
Steve. All right. Shall we move to committee business? You okay with that, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've got a lot of things forward here, especially some of the questions.
Thank you for doing that, Josh. I know that adds to the evening adventure. So Rob, I had two things under committee business. One was we're asking all of the committees to review their issue manager team lists for what needs to continue and what maybe would fall off the list. Totally up to the committees, because these are basically work groups of the committees. That's what an issue manager team is. And then looking at topics and framing questions for the next tank waste meeting, which is scheduled for February. So I don't know if you have anything more on your committee business list or not.
Well, yeah, only that we really need to flush out our IM groups. And so anybody listening on the phone, I really would like you to help or give me a call, or once I get the phone numbers here of everybody, I'll start calling you. But I need to make sure that we've got our three most important IMs covered with good people that want to participate. So so that's the biggest thing.
Right.
And
So there are 4 IM teams right now, right?
But one is shared with the RAP, having to do with the lateral flow. Okay, and I think that, as you know, Tom mentioned to me, that lateral flow is really an interesting thing. And let me just summarize. Vince Finesco kind of headed up a lot of this work. And back when they were dumping lots and lots of water from all the various activities in the site, he was able to collect information to show that that the water penetrating down through towards the aquifer would hit a lens, okay, and that lens would then divert it and send it in specific areas at the ends and the corners, or the lateral flow out. And so the question was always, well, you know, is this helping or hurting the transported radionuclides to the aquifer? And so the one thing that Tom pointed out to me here is he looked at some studies on the amount of water being dumped, and it's a significant fraction of what it was when the lenses were active, I guess you might call it. So I think that some of the lateral flow is probably less, I don't know about advice on it other than encouraging DOE to make sure that they use lateral flow if they see it's necessary in their modeling. And that's the high level thing I think that we would issue there, if anything. Other than that, I'd like the RAP committee to really consider this and you know, maybe take the lead here if they could. But we're still really interested in that. If people remember Vince, you know, he did a lot of work for this committee, and my hat's off to him. I hope he enjoys his retirement. So the other three really are, we've got IM group on the evaporator, paying attention to the modifications and to the issues having to do with evaporator operations. And large of that is because the committee here felt that it is a critical, important piece of hardware that needs to be maintained and needs to keep working for us to accomplish our mission here. The second one is the grout issue, which we just recently talked about, and that's a real exciting issue. Again, it's only grouting of the low-level waste, the waste that needs to be isolated from us, humanity, immobilized for periods of time of up to 300 years or so. And then the fourth one has to do with the tank integrity, which we saw in the presentation here today. So the three important ones, I think, are the grout and the tank and I'm tripping over my words here, but we can understand that I think our priorities need to be there. There are some emerging issues as well on the site where would probably be more in the area of the wrap, but please tell me if people are interested in this, is these cesium strontium capsules. And that activity. I think that we need to be kept current on the progress of that. We need to make sure that we have, you know, a good understanding of how that operation is going to work, and make sure that you know, or make sure that the science makes sense to some of us or most of us. Or, you know, it's just that it's a really important part of the project here is the cesium and strontium capsule. In that, other than that.
So your recommendation is that the priority IM teams for this committee be the evaporator, grout, and tank integrity?
Correct.
And that RAP be the shepherd for lateral flow? Or what about that fourth one? What's your recommendation for that?
I don't know, Tom. You and I talked about this at length.
Yeah, I think lateral flow is something that's going to keep coming back. It's going to be on the minds when we're talking about models and PAs. I don't think that lateral flow white paper is something that's going to make it through. So I would say let's keep lateral flow in our hearts and maybe not on the IM team list.
Thoughts on that? The recommendation would be to keep 3 of the 4 IM teams attached to tank waste, and let the IM team work on the white paper on lateral flow. Not go forward. It's a little shy on membership.
Yeah.
One of whom is Tom.
Right.
The geologist, right?
Tom, put me on it.
Okay. Let's change it from lateral flow white paper to lateral flow.
To just lateral flow?
Yeah. That makes it easier.
So what is the charge or focus for that group? If you had to say, we want you to go explore what? Fill in blank.
The impacts, potential impacts of fine grain lenses on performance assessment results. And it's another science experiment, but that's what it is.
What might be the high level advice potentially?
I think, you know, off the top of my head, that the modelers should consider the fact that there are potentially ancient lake beds and fine grained sediments in the subsurface, which is something that they do. So
you're telling them to do something.
We're telling them to do something they're already doing, which is why I'm not.
Yeah.
I think that we should keep lateral flow in our minds when we're talking through presentations and framing questions. I don't think it's anything that we can advise the TPA agencies on. Ecology has a really strong hydrogeology team that pushes when there's a need to push on the DOE modeling contractors to add fine grained layers. They do it, and the results are published.
So there's no need for an IM.
Chris, what are you thinking?
Is Mike Klein on our schedule to give an update on groundwater in any of the foreseeable future that you might have?
November 9th. Pardon? November 9th, we're doing groundwater.
Well, maybe we could ask Mike Klein to specifically address lateral flow. He might say, oh, that's taken into account in our cumulative impact evaluation, and modelers have been doing that.
I can tell you right now that it is, and they are. It's in the documentation that has already been published on the administrative record.
November is a traditional groundwater update kind of month for RAP.
So yeah, we can definitely ask that question, but it is.
We know the answer.
And Gary's nodding like, okay, we'll alert Mike that the question is gonna come up.
I'm kind of at the point where, do we really need an IM team?
Can we back up just a moment? So I'm a little bit, I'm not sure I'm clear. We're gonna ask my client a question that we already know the answer to. Is that, or do you want to expand upon the question?
I think that if Chris wants to ask the question after the briefing, you know, as part of the Q&A session, then that's something that we can do. And Gary, as long as you just know that that question might come up, so my client can have an answer ready. And
Yeah, I mean, here's where I'm going with it. If you can work to define that question, and we can get it to Mike in advance, that would help him give you perhaps a more comprehensive answer than just on the moment.
And Chris, I can pass you the documents that I'm talking about with the ones that show the fine grains already built in.
Send me a model question.
I will. It'll be wrong, but it'll.
But I think to follow up on what Susan said, do we really need an IM team for this? I think we need to get some input from DOE that everybody hears to answer that question.
Right. And I will ask RAP exactly the same question I'm asking you now. On this list, which of the RAP IM teams need to continue their work? So I'm going to sound like a broken record by November. Dan?
Isn't there some work that the groundwater folks can do to better predict the effects of these lenses on groundwater, the dye tests, analysis? So that's out of the realm of possibility, Tom?
So as part of the WMAC performance assessment, there was a number of extra models that got run to include fine grain lenses. And what they found is under low flow conditions, the lenses do have a spreading effect, but on the sort of half a meter range as opposed to tens of meters to hundreds of meters. And what that actually does is it slows the contamination such that the peak dose is actually, it's a longer dose over, but it's a short, lower amount of dose in groundwater. Because it delays, it's a timer less.
Yeah.
So it delays the flow, so you don't get one big spike coming down. You get, so more conservative is one big spike coming down when you're doing your assessment. That's a case-by-case basis. Sea Farm had a historic river channel underneath it, so it didn't have as many fine grain sediments, and the fine grains were not as fine. So it's going to be site by site, and the modelers at the site, you know, being a former modeler, I'm impressed with the work they do every time I see one of the models. So I don't find it a concern from my own belief.
So,
but I would support any conversation in RAP.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. The conversation in RAP would be good, because we are now finding a really interesting rabbit hole, but this is tanks.
Yeah.
That's why I don't usually come to tanks.
I says all things.
Yeah.
And then talk about
So I think where we left it, Rob, is you have 3 IM teams.
Right.
And an ear out for when the word lateral flow comes up.
Yeah.
Bunny ears, right. Is there anything else we need to do on IM teams before we talk about your next meeting?
I'm looking at some of Bob's notes, and I think we have a lot of them covered. He did mention to me on the phone and in discussion that he'd like to hear more about operations of the DFL. And so I noticed today I got a flash from DOE talking about the new employees for WTP and their training programs and things of that sort. So maybe something about the hierarchy of operations of the WTP or the DFL process. And is anybody else interested in something? Again, we describing, talking about the as we're converting into operations, there's a hierarchy of operations and decisions to be made and controls and things of that sort. And he's felt that we should understand more how that happens.
Chris?
We heard in a previous presentation from DOE that there are either 25 or 27 separate operations that have to take place in DF law from beginning to end for it to be successful. So I think it'd be really interesting to know how they're going to ensure that all of these 25 or 27 operations operate as they should, consistently, process control, so that there's no bottleneck should one of them go down. I think that's going to be a critical challenge to have that many operations to get them all synchronized day in and day out, day in and day out for 50 years. So that would be part of the operations. Yeah.
And there again, what would our high-level advice be here?
I think it would be information.
Just an understanding, okay.
Yeah, and it's possible that advice could come out of it, but I think it's just to get information to understand things better.
So Steve, I think the idea here is that the IM teams would spearhead out the advice that we, take a look, do we need advice on this subject? Maybe draft it, get it talking about, and then present it to us, and then we go through it. As far as the presentations go, they're informative to us on the progress of the site and what some of the hiccups are and some of the good things are and the accomplishments in that. And so that's what I was referring to. She was asking, what other thing we need on our work list is that, do we need to have a discussion? And I think that Bob really felt that, and so do I, feel that operations is an important factor here. And all the steps you got to go through, et cetera.
If I may interject, part of the presentation that we're going to have on DF law goes to this very topic. We do have a slide that we've shown several times, and we call it a couple of different things. Basically, it's day in the life of DF law,
right.
And it describes many of the different operations that are going on simultaneously. So, and that will be Thursday morning with Matt Irwin and there's a deputy director, a new person at Bechtel who's going to be giving that. I think his first name is Chris Music. They will be giving that presentation. So that is intended as part of that presentation.
Okay.
Are we talking about the February meeting? Have we moved on to talk about?
That's the next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm ahead of it.
Yeah, the current agenda has Matt Irwin and Val McCain, but they'll bring who they need to bring. The revised agenda for the HAB meeting and for orientation went out because Josh is really good at multitasking. They're in your inbox.
Is there a revised work plan?
So what we have is the provisional work plan that was given the nod at the last HAB meeting. So the current version is dated, it's version 14, June 30th. It's in the packet that went out for the board meeting last Monday.
Okay, I don't have it.
So we're working provisionally because the full board did not adopt it, but they gave staff and agencies permission to use it for planning purposes, so we wouldn't come to a screeching halt. So it's up for adoption in October. Yeah.
So I want to circle back to IM teams and grout. So we have this grout IM team, and when I hear the conversations, today you heard the pro-grout consortium, but there's also a not pro-grout consortium on the HAB. But I listened to a lot of the arguments with the pro-grout consortium, me being sort of in that camp. A lot of them, I suspect are related to being concerned about the mission and cost of the mission and whether our infrastructure can last that long. I know that that's part of why I think about things besides vitrification. And all I have to do is look at the system plan and add up years and say this 40 years that we've been hearing for more than 20 years is buoy. And I wonder, is there a separate IM team, and this is just an idea that we don't have to answer there, that is not really about grout. It is about, do we have advice or just someone who wants to collect our concerns to help facilitate better ideas on what the future mission ought to be. And when I take back, you know, a lot of our advice that we've sent DOE has sent us a letter saying we aren't interested in advice on that. We're only interested in high-level environmental policy. And then we ask to get briefed on what's going on in the policy realm, and they tell us we can't talk to you about that because it's in holistic negotiations. And I proposed that we have a holistic negotiations IM team, and that got poo-pooed by the leadership at the time. And I'm thinking maybe the alternative to that is there an IM team that thinks about improvements to the tank waste treatment mission that doesn't have my great-grandchildren being able to retire digging up tanks that have turned to rust. And I'm apologize for the hyperbole there, but you know, is and that might be separate than grout, and that might absorb some of the grout discussions that we've had, and be able to broaden that scope. I mean, that's just, and I'm not sure I can completely define what that means. I'm hoping that team can define it, but I just want to bring that up as an idea.
So when you look, all y'all, it's a Texas plural of y'all, all y'all, look forward to February. What do you want to dig into in February that moves forward a discussion that could lead to, what do you call it, Mike, actionable policy level advice? Or some have product that helps the mission move forward. Advice isn't the only HAB product, but that's a different soapbox.
Just to clarify, constructionable.
Constructionable, oh, I poisoned you.
Okay. Constructive, actionable policy level advice. We're talking about grout earlier, and Sue mentioned longer range focus. It occurs to me that it might be shaping up as more of a near-term focus. I have a sense that that's something that this committee will want to flush out as well. When is the right time for information to be presented? And how does that fit into the context of the longer range objective, not yet quite defined? How'd I do there, Sue?
Very good. The only thing I say is the definition of long-term and short-term is different to every person.
Sure.
So I'm new to the Tank Waste Committee, and I'm a short timer on the Tank Waste Committee. It seems like there's been a lot of people asking for discussions about grout for a long time. And it seems like there are 3 new bits of information or timely bits of information that are out there and are going to be right around February. There's the National Academy, there's maybe a TBI update, and there's the Conca opinion pieces. You know, it seems like, you know, is there a perfect storm for grout discussion finally, so we can, you know, have that sort of closure on that conversation and decide whether we need an IM team or whether we agree to disagree.
Is it possible to design a conversation around grout that is candid enough to help you understand the key questions and flexible enough that we don't invoke heart palpitations on senior management and TPA agencies.
We do a big board game where we have.
I'll design it.
Million gallon blocks of goo and then have different buckets of in-state route, out-of-state route, vitrification, and then, you know, everybody's got a budget to spend, but we have to have the briefings first.
Okay, I'm all in for the Post-it note exercise.
So wouldn't, you know, Jacob has asked for a larger picture look at the grout and thinking in the planning. Well, system plan 10 is going to come out before too long. Isn't that the right place to be discussing that in the system plan?
Yeah, so the system plan is more, I don't want to speak for Department of Energy, I guess. I probably should, but as a reader and someone who helped produce it years ago, the current version of the system plan feels more like it is Ecology's document. And the tank farm contractor is being paid to run Department of Ecology's cases, and they're fine, they're fascinating, by the way, and you should read it. And you know, don't expect it to have all of the answers that we're looking for.
No, I would think though that in the system plan, they talk about future.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's what we're talking about here in looking at the grout and what works and what doesn't work for the grout and make our comments in the system plan to that point is answer those questions.
Yeah.
And then that would be our advice on the system plan or the comments that we would have.
Dan?
Yeah, if we could get an understanding of the technical readiness rating, the accelerated testing, and drought formulation, if we could get a general overview of those three things, we might be better prepared to continue this discussion further.
So question to the agencies. Conceptually, how hard would it be for your folks who understand the questions to do a Grout 101 in February?
As long as it's not, which again, I don't know if it is, if it's tied up to list negotiations, which I hope don't last that long. I hope they'd be over the next couple months. Again, I can't speak for timing of it, but we should be able to speak to it, but I also defer to DOE about if that's been put on the agenda. And I know I can probably get my folks to come on and talk about it as long as it's not tied up in some negotiation or something.
Because what I'm hearing is like lots and lots of questions. And we know there are disparate opinions on the board about do we like grout or do we not? People there's a couple of seats that have drawn some pretty clear lines in the sand. And the technology of grout has changed over the last 28 years because they've gotten better at it. So it feels like we've got old questions, but maybe the answers have evolved.
This also applies to tank closure as well. So it would be really good for the tank waste committee to be well versed in these three aspects of drought.
Right, which is why I'm asking about 101, because the other thing is you got an influx of new members. We got 16 new people who may not, I mean, they're starting at a totally different place, which is why I'm asking, is Grout 101 a possibility? Because then you're informed about a decision. Do you want to continue the IM team and what would work on this issue look like?
At least for the last 2 years, since I've been on the board, there's been no presentations on Grout 101 or anything else.
True.
Or it was right before you joined the board. And they're actually really good presentations, and we got ecology's perspective at that time. You know, and to give you Jake's thought, when I listened to that, I thought, technically, I'm not really in ecology's corner, but they had a lot of really great questions that they thought ought to be answered about grout, and I'm still waiting for Department of Energy's answer to those. And that's not really been their approach. Their approach is, instead of directly answer the ecology's comments, it's been to go to national academies and say, and those sorts, and that's okay, I agree with that too. But I bet you that something you could get everyone's agreement on, if ecology still has those same questions, and that I don't know, because it's been, 3 some years, but I would be interested in hearing Department of Energy's answers to those questions, for instance. And I bet that both factions, the anti-grout and both grout, could probably agree that that would be good advice. So, I mean, and that's an example of things that I believe we can work out. And that's what I love about being on the HAB, is that it is a consensus board, and we go and find common ground.
And there are a couple of products the HAB creates when you hit the wall and you discover you can't find common ground, but you still want to give perspectives to the agencies.
I know.
And so there's even plan B when you don't totally come together.
Yeah.
And I've seen it work without bloodshed on some pretty tough issues. So what do you want for February? Because we are desperately trying to get ahead of the curve on agendas.
I'd like to answer a question posed earlier. I agree with what you said, Eric. I think that, gosh. And I've been doing so well.
So what did you call him?
You called him Eric again.
You know what, it's gonna be like a $20 bill in a jar. Every time I do that. Beverages, my gosh. Okay, so if you're not on the inside of the inside joke, I've something called Brian Eric.
More than once.
In the past.
And he's called Jan Pam. And what is it called? Suey or something.
Okay.
Sorry, Mike, what were you saying?
Thank you, sir. So, given that there is some information that's forthcoming from the academy, from others perhaps, we're going to need to give the agencies time to digest that information. February may be too soon. What I'd recommend you consider doing is using some of your time also to help shape those questions that you want, refine those questions, so that when that information is made available, you have an opportunity to check it against that information, so that when we do consider presentations 101 level, which I'm an advocate for, quite frankly, and for not just the tank waste committee, but to have as a whole, because the more the better. But I think that would add some value. So I would offer that for your consideration. But I do agree with Ryan with your perspective, and I think that we also need the other agency's perspective as we move forward here.
And I've got it, in May, the Tank Waste Committee has got System Plan 10, according to my version of the work plan. So that might shoehorn in what Rob was saying earlier. Would it kind of fit in that overall topic? So we're staying on the system, on the work plan, and giving more time.
Grout and system plan in the same meeting, that's a barn starter.
Yeah, that's okay. I have an idea for your next meeting that involves using that wall. So you can come up with those questions.
You're
Okay,
talking
so-
about the February 8th meeting, right?
February 8th.
Okay, I've got a couple of ideas for the February meeting too.
Cool.
That I want to throw out.
Keep going.
One, I haven't been following it, but the operations contract, the replacement contract for the tank farms and the WTP going to a overall one operating contractor to manage waste from tanks to glass. The status on that, because I have no idea where it is. I just haven't bothered to follow it. And the other piece was, can we get a walking tour of the WTP. Since the day is WTP, it'd probably be really nice to have a walking tour of what's the status of the plant today, or in February. I know, it's February.
It's February.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, DOE, Gary, Mike, but once melters and everything start up, doesn't that further restrict the kind of tours and stuff that people can go and actually walk and see?
Sure. There will be.
When is that scheduled? Coming
This
up?
weekend.
Yeah, yeah, we'd have to go tomorrow.
Oh,
I'm ready.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
I was gonna say, if you don't ask there.
My guess is enough things are already operating.
I mean, we're not restricted.
Yeah, yeah.
No, we're gonna be here.
Yeah.
That's right.
So in the February 8th meeting, we have the WTP updates. So, and then some cleanup priorities.
Yes, there will be discussion. Highly probable cleanup priorities advice will be percolating at that time.
Right.
In that regard, the 2023 to 2027 5-year plan now is publicly available and out.
Yes.
Right. And we sent out that link today,
Right.
if folks hadn't found it already.
Yeah, and that could be also a part of this, the 5-year plan in the cleanup priorities.
That depends on how the IM team wants to go there, but yeah.
Is that an IM team issue or is that just our meeting? Because our meeting, we're just gonna get some updates, WTP updates, and hopefully there will be some, idea of the, the integration activities. And you wanted some contract issues of how they're bringing that whole circle together, followed by our cleanup priorities. That's a pretty full meeting.
It really is.
So, the other thing that I became aware of that other members should know is that, and you can correct me, Josh, if I'm wrong on this, but Josh sent me a easy to do, handy dandy guide to using Teams to have conversations. And we can have that independent of you, can we not?
The facilitation team?
Yes, we can have.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to talk to us to type into Teams.
Right, so my suggestion would be is that maybe our IM people start using that a bit more to make sure everybody can be informed. And if you want to have an extra meeting or, hey, we want to talk about grout today, you guys want to get on the phone and we'll just see what we've got? Certainly after the academy's report's going to come out, we're going to want to all kind of bounce off each other. What does this mean to us? And work that way. So, that's just future stuff that we can do. So communication is really important for the tank waste committee. So yeah.
Caveat to that is that anytime we have an IM team call or whatever, somebody from DOE must be on there. So I am committing to making myself as available as possible for those teams. We don't need facilitation necessarily, but that would be at the request of the team. But either I or Mike would have to be part of that conversation. And our intent is to be more of a fly on the wall.
Okay.
Because that falls under FACA guidelines. But we do support that discussion and the quest for knowledge.
Right.
So we're not to inhibit anything. We're there to just facilitate it.
Right.
And Rob, from that perspective, I'm happy to hop on those calls as well. That way if there's any, and I don't have to be, but again,
Right.
I'm not like DOE where I have to be on it. I'm happy to be on it if you guys want an ecology presence. That way if you have any questions you want to punt over to ecology, I can carry it to my staff and follow up and stuff.
Yeah. But one other thing is that a week or two ago, I asked, so I've been paying attention to a lot of the permit mods for, in particular, the WTP and tank farms and now that the evaporator is nearly, well, it's operating now. So a lot of those mods have been changed, and I think basically my own comments have been, when I call up them, says, well, has this been reviewed by an independent qualified engineer? If it has to do with piping, if it has to do with, it just depends. And so I asked Ryan if he maybe put together a list of, in the next year, some of the activities that would involve permitting, that ecology and tank waste may intercede. And he's kind of looking at it now, and when I get that, I'll certainly send it around to everybody, and that we can take a look at those. And sometimes those permits are 450 pages long, and sometimes, and most of it though, there's always generally a very good introduction of what it is about and summary, and then it's followed by just tons and tons of detail. And in some cases, they were changing 4 words, and it was like, how many pages? So don't try to print them out. You just gotta go through them. But those are the kind of things that we're gonna get, and we'll make sure the members of the Tank Waste Committee sees that list. And anything you're interested in, let's talk about.
So before I ask Rob for final words, I want to check in. We have 17 people online, which really is about 11 because there's 6 of us in here that are wired in. That means there are, 11 or 12 people online. So if you're with us online, do you have final questions, comments, observations? Things have been kind of quiet in the online space, and I want to check in with you. Things are still quiet in the IM space, in the online space.
Well, we're waiting for some of that. I posted a link to the EMCBC website for updates on the contract, Sue, that you spoke to. So that's the information that we have available to us. I'm sure you can appreciate the sensitivity of procurement. So I recommend you take a look at that for updates.
All right. Mr. Chair, it's your first meeting and you survived.
My only final word is that let's use the phone more and talk, if you don't mind. I'll try to return all the messages that I get when I call, but I need to learn a lot more, and you people are so helpful, everybody in the committee. And anybody online or new members, please give Ruth a call and say you're ready for it and you want to be on this exciting tank waste committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your time.